Good evening. Randy, I'm like you. We could have sat there and talked all night. I'd have been happy. It is enjoyable to say the least, Tonight's lesson intentionally is going to be a two-part lesson. I will not finish tonight. That is the plan. That is the intention. So I am going to go to a point, and hopefully we can all be back here next week. And if not, hopefully it's because the good Lord came back in between now and next week, and we're all enjoying the rewards of our service here. I want to look at the idea of some critical choice moments in our lives. We know that each and every one of us, that everybody that ever walks the face of this earth is faced at times with decisions that will absolutely shape the rest of our lives. Now, I'm not saying that we cannot change our path at times. I'm not saying that we cannot go back. We cannot go back. That's the issue. But I'm not saying that we can't redirect and go a different direction. But there are times in our lives where we make choices that are going to affect us for the rest of our lives. Critical choice moments. They are at times what seems like a simple choice to make. Do I take this job? Do I not? Do I move to this city? Do I not? Do I go to this place? Do I talk to this person? How do I react in this situation? But they turn out to be life-altering decisions. Most of our critical choice moments in life will happen between the age of about 13 and 25. Now, I look around us right now, and there's none of us sitting here that fit that 13 to 25 demographic. But we are all working with, talking to, spending time with, influencing people in that demographic. The ones that are shaping their lives right now. Now, each and every one of us sitting here tonight still has a life to live. We still can move in the right direction, or we can still move in the wrong direction if we choose to. We still have choices to make. But so many of our life choices have already been made. Who do I marry? Where do I live? What profession do I have? Things of that nature. Those decisions have been made for us already, or made by us. But in that age from 13 to 25, that younger demographic, so many of them are making multiple decisions without thinking about the consequences. It's just they see it as short term, they see it as momentary, they see it as something that's fleeting, and they never think twice about it. Yet those choices have lifetime consequences. So tonight I want to look at some of those choices. Number one, and should always be the first and foremost on our minds, is choosing to be a disciple of Christ. Am I going to follow him? Am I going to follow his teachings? Am I going to listen to what he has to say? Am I going to go the direction that he is pointing me? Am I going to walk in the footsteps of Jesus? Or am I going to choose to walk my own path and do my own thing and go my own way? And this reminded of a poem that I think pretty much everybody that ever went through Mount Pleasant High School and most others had to learn at some point in time, but the road less traveled. The idea that you're in these woods, in these yellow woods, and there's two paths diverging, and which way am I going to go? Robert Frost said he chose the road less traveled because it had all the promise. And that, as Christians, is our decision. Are we going to choose the road less traveled? Are we going to choose the Christian path? Or are we going to choose that wide path that so many are going to follow that is going to lead to destruction? Choosing the church family is one that is an absolute critical choice moment because it has lasting impact not only on yourself but on others in that congregation as well. Do you choose a congregation where you can be useful in the work of the Lord, where you can grow in your own nature, where you can help others grow as well, where you can be of service? Or do you choose a congregation where you can sit back in the back and nobody listens, nobody sees, nobody knows if you're still there or not? Do you choose one because you like what the preacher has to say, because his tone is great, because his message is pleasing to the ears, because he makes it easy to hear? Or do you choose one where the preacher is basing everything on what Scripture has to say? Those are critical choice moments. What congregation am I going to say, this is my home? Less important, but still, even to a Christian, extremely important, is choosing a vocation. Am I going to choose a job that is going to allow me to serve Christ? Am I going to choose a job that's going to allow me to be at services on a Sunday and services on a Wednesday? Am I going to choose a profession that is going to allow me to build myself up mentally, or am I going to choose a profession that's going to tear me down, where it's going to put me around people that are constantly dragging me away from Christ? So, our kids, our grandkids, our friends, our family, in this younger generation, the ones that we are helping, or should be, as older, more mature Christians, helping to shape their lives, how are we helping them to choose a vocation, to choose a congregation, to decide if they're going to be a disciple of Christ or not? Are these decisions where we are actually actively involved? Most people will meet their spouse in that time frame. Not all of them. I didn't meet mine much later, so there are outliers, there are exceptions. But most will meet their spouse in that time frame. So, are we preparing them to know what to look for in a spouse? Are we giving them godly instruction so that they know what that helpmeet looks like as far as God's plan and not the world's plan? Are we showing them how to choose the friends? Are we as ourselves, and this is not just in 13 to 25 demographic, are we choosing our friends wisely? Are we choosing them based on how they build us up spiritually? Or are we choosing them based on how they help us financially, how they help us in business, how they help us to chase goals here on this earth? How do we choose our friends? Our spiritual choices, though, those are the ones that have not just lasting consequences on this earth, but on our eternity as well. Now, every one of those that we looked at there can and does affect our eternity if we allow it. But I want to start with the idea where we started a while ago, discipleship and following Jesus. Are we choosing to follow him? Luke chapter 14 is where we're going to be, starting in verse 25. Now great crowds accompanied him and turned and said to him, if anyone comes to me and does not, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, there is, and we've discussed this in the past, there is some difference in the way things were said then and the way things are said now. Christ is not telling you to go out and hate anybody. He's saying if you love them more than you love me, we got an issue. He's saying if you don't love me more than everything on this list, your mother, your father, your wife, your children, your brothers, your sisters, and yes, even your own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you desires to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it. Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to mock, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 men to meet who has come with him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So, therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Christ said, following me has a price to pay. He says also, following me or choosing not to follow me has its own price to pay. But where life choices are concerned, where those consequential life decisions are, choosing to follow Christ is easier the younger we are. If we can teach our children, if we can teach our grandchildren, if we can teach our neighbors' children, whoever they are, this younger generation, that this is what is important, then we can build them up in Christ. We can save them from a lifetime of bad decision making. We can save them from a lifetime of heartache. And we can save them from so much, and we're going to get to this a little bit later on, of the pain that someone like Paul had to go through, where his early decisions in life led him away from Christianity, and it wasn't until later in life that he came to Christ, where he had to think about all those things that he'd done, and he had to understand that I am the chief of all sinners. It is, and we'll look at it in further detail, the difference between a Josiah and a Manasseh. Where we looked at Manasseh this morning, the understanding that he had to be brought to his knees by God. He had to be shackled. He had to be bound. He had to end up as an older man begging for God and being humbled. Or Josiah, who was spared all that because he turned to God in his youth. It's a Timothy versus Paul. Timothy came to Christ young. Timothy was brought up in the Lord. Timothy was brought up by his mother and his grandmother to understand who Christ is and what Christianity is about, and to serve Christ faithfully. Paul, on the other hand, was not. Paul was Saul. Paul was the man that was out persecuting Christians. And as such, when he became a Christian, he was met with some resistance. I know you. I know what you used to do. Is this some kind of trick? Are you really? And he had to kind of prove himself. Spiritual choices. They are choices that will either allow us entrance into heaven, or they will keep us out of heaven. We all know people who are what you would call failed disciples. Those that did not make it, those that did not make that lasting choice, those that did not hold on to it. Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 14, we see that very idea where the sower sows the word, and those who are the ones along the path where the word is sown, when they hear Satan, immediately comes and takes away the word that is sown in them. So they heard the words, they know what's right, they listened to it, and Satan just came and plucked it right out of their hearts. They never held on to it long enough to process it. And these are the ones sown on rocky ground, the ones who, when they hear the word, immediately receive it with joy, and they have no root in themselves, but endure for a while. Then when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately they fall away. The one who says, this Christianity sounds good, I like it, let me join, let me come with you, let me do it. But then troubles come along. Things don't go the way they think they should. And all of a sudden there's no foundation, so they're going to turn away from Christ. That's why it's so important to build up children in the Lord, so that they have that firm foundation, so that they understand what's going on before they get out to the world, before they get so difficult, before all of the other issues in life come along that are going to be difficult. See, when they're still at home, we can kind of shelter them from some of that. And I'm not saying shelter in a bad way where they don't know what's going on in the world, but we can take some of that blow ourselves, so it's not such a rocky start for them as Christians. And others are the ones sown among the thorns. They are those who hear the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desire for other things enter into the choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. But those who are sown in good soil are the ones who hear the word and accept it and bear fruit 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold. Christ said, I got a warning for you. He said, some of you are going to hear, some of you are not going to listen. Some of you are going to hear, it's going to take, but it's not going to last. Because you don't have a foundation. You're not rooted. You're not grounded. He said, some of you are just going to get choked out by the world. You're going to look at things, you're going to find them that are more important, and you are just going to go the other direction. Some in this world are going to, and this is the first one, Satan comes and steals it from their heart. You heard it, but there's total rejection. They do not identify as a Christian. They never want to. They're never going to. They say, I don't need this Christ person. That's a critical choice moment in their lives. We're going to acknowledge Christ or we're not. We're going to follow Him or am I not? Then we have those that are the worldly Christians. They identify, but they don't practice. You ask the majority of the people in the United States if they are a Christian, they will tell you yes. Even now, when everything is as crazy as it is, most people think or say that they are Christians. They believe in a God. They believe in Christ. They believe that He is this loving person, and they believe that's enough. So I don't have to act like it. I don't have to practice it. God's out there. He'll be there when I need Him. I'll go get Him when I need Him. And they don't actually act like Christians. And there's the occasional Christians. They sometimes show up to church. They sometimes don't. They sporadically worship. They sporadically pray to God. They sporadically read His Word. But it's just kind of hit or miss. When is it convenient? Christ says this is not discipleship. This is not it's a critical choice, but it's not the right choice. You are not choosing to follow me if you're one of these three. So we have to teach our children young. We have to teach our grandchildren, and if we didn't get to them young, we got to teach them old. We got to show them that this is the way. And we've got to constantly remind ourselves of it as well. Because I promise you, Satan's out there. He's trying with us. He is trying to tempt us. He is trying to divide us. He is trying to pit one against the other. And he's trying to say, God doesn't have it all under control. You need my help. We have to be strong enough to say, get behind me, Satan. I'm not going to do it. We can choose to be a successful disciple. We can choose God. We can choose to follow. And the sooner the better. And realize we got to start wherever we're at right now. So if you've got somebody you're talking to, if you've got a loved one, if you've got somebody that needs to hear the gospel, we can't go back and change their youth. We cannot go back and reach them in an earlier time. We cannot ask them to go back and redo anything that they've done. We start where they are today, and we start where we are today. Today is the day that we choose whether or not we're going to be a disciple. Period. We start from here, right now. So the sooner the better. Today is the day of salvation, is what we're told. But we have to genuinely embrace Christ's way. Not the world's. Not what Satan has to say. Not what the popular preacher on TV or the radio has to say. Not what that preacher that sounds good has to say. We embrace God's way. We embrace His plan. And we follow that along. But we have to be committed to do it no matter what adversity comes our way. And if it's not evident at this time right now, I don't know when it ever will be. Life's not always easy. Life is not always stopping and smelling the roses. We should stop and smell them when we have the chance. But Christ never promised life was going to be easy. But when it's hard, when it's difficult, that is one of those critical choice moments. How are we going to deal with it? What are we going to do? I said the sooner the better. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1. Getting ready to close out the book of Ecclesiastes, this is what we see. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. He says, look, get to know God now, while you're young. While you can, before you've messed up your life, before you've gone somewhere else, and before those days come where your aches and pains and life's just not much fun anymore. So you get to know God now. So wherever we're at, we're still not in our youth, we're the youngest we will ever be. We're not getting any younger. So we get to know God now. So that when those difficult times come, we can last. I told you I was going to get to it a little bit later. The sooner the better. Josiah versus Manasseh. Josiah, we know that his kingdom was preserved because he turned himself to God in his youth. He avoided the guilt of Paul. He avoided the situation with Manasseh when he had to be brought low. He avoided all those struggles that come with not being a godly person. Because he came to him early, and he followed, and he listened, because he built a faith that allowed him to. Timothy and Paul. Paul, he dealt with it well. He understood that his past sins were forgiven. He understood that God had made him whole. But we still, at times in his writings, look and see the pain of the decisions he's made in the past. Now, he understood that those past decisions brought him to where he was now and then made him useful to God. He gets that. But we also see a man that understands that he was Saul. He understands that he negatively affected the church at times. We see him understand that he persecuted the way. And while Paul is a man writing by inspiration, while Paul is a man that is strong in the faith, and he understood that he had fought the good fight, that he had finished the course, and that he was going to receive that crown of life, we also see that Paul is human. And Paul at times is frail. And Paul at times has to think about the consequences and decisions of his earthly life. So we try to raise children up so they don't have to do that. And we try to live our lives where we don't have to do that. Our spiritual choices matter. There are fewer bad habits to break when we come to Christ earlier. There are fewer of those earthly draws and all that temptation if we come to Christ earlier. There are fewer consequences of all that past sin to carry on and to bear. And there's a greater likelihood of spiritual success because we can build that root system, we can build that foundation, and we can teach them right from wrong early on. Now I realize I'm talking to a congregation that is older, myself included. But we all have children in our lives. Grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends' children, ones that we can influence today. Because we've talked about it. If you look around the congregation, if you look around the church as a whole, there's pretty much a generation that doesn't exist in the church. It's a sad fact that we've lost them. I'm not saying there's no hope of them coming back. I'm not saying there's no hope of us bringing them back. But that generation's not teaching their children about God. Somebody has to. And that somebody has to be the ones that are serving God faithfully today. It has to be us. It has to be, we have to step in and be the parents. We have to step in and be that godly influence. We have to step in and be that one that's saying, look, let me teach you. Let me show you. Let me help you. Let me help you to make good choices. Choices are not always going to be easy. In fact, Christ says that choices are not easy. He said that discipleship is not easy. He said that the road is not going to be a simple road to follow. But he says it's going to be worth it. He tells us that we're going to have to take up our cross and follow Him. He tells us that we're going to have to choose at times between family and friends and Him. He tells us at times that we're going to have to choose between worldly pleasure and we're going to have to choose between eternity in heaven. Decisions are difficult, but they're necessary. And He's given us every tool we need to make those decisions. He's given us every tool we need to teach the children. He's given us every tool we need to change our lives and to help change the lives of those around us. So that when we look at the congregation and we look at the church in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, however long God gives us, we don't have to look back and say we've lost another generation. we can look and see that we raised up children in the Lord, and we gave them the opportunity to avoid some of those same decisions that we made, so that they're serving God faithfully when they're older. But here's the thing, we make a choice each and every day. Do we choose to serve the Lord, or do we choose to serve Satan? Do we choose to follow God, or do we choose to follow ourselves? Do we live for Him, or do we live for the moment? The choice is ours to make tonight. Are we going to follow God? Are we going to serve Him faithfully? Are we going to teach your youth? Are we going to live according to God's plan instead of man's plan? It all starts with submission to Him. It all starts with being immersed into baptism because we are a sinful creature, and that is the way to forgiveness. There is no other way. There is no other alternative. Baptism is what God demands in His plan of salvation. And then we start making the decisions that Christians make. We start living like Christ. We start understanding that we have the mind of Christ, and we have the words of God, and we can make those right decisions every day. If you need the prayers of the church, if you need to put on Christ in baptism, whatever you need, let's address those needs tonight as we stand and sing.